Being an accountant and having worked in the NHS, I felt that that wasn't correct, and so I did some investigation, contacted some other people about what the entitlements were for the elderly, and came to the conclusion that the legal position was, because my mother's needs were primarily healthcare related, that it wasn't lawful for the NHS to ask me to fill in such a form, and for me to be told that my mother would have to be paying charges for her healthcare for effectively the rest of her life. So, having power of attorney, I felt it was a duty on me to protect her interests and the interests of my father, who's still alive and living in their family home, to say to the NHS, well, I'm sorry, but I don't think you've any right to ask me to pay for my mother's care from her own resources. She's in fact entitled to NHS care.
And as they kept on sending you these assessment forms, what happened then?
Well, I mean, I had lots of contact with lots of people there. I mean, I spoke to... I wrote letters back and said, my interpretation of the law was different from the NHS. And I invited them to take me to court because I said this was an important issue. And therefore, I had power of attorney. I was quite willing to pay if the court ruled that my mother's treatment should be paid for from her own resources. But my view was that if it went to court, there was precedent from the Coughlan Court of Appeal case, that in fact, if the reason you need to be cared for is primarily because of your healthcare needs, then whether that home is provided within a hospital, a private nursing home, or indeed your own home, then the NHS has to pay.
And when you, as you put it, invited them to take you to court, did they take up the invitation?
I didn't take up my invitation. I did get a letter when Purley Hospital was closing from the Social Services Department, who said if I declined to sign their form, then they would take it upon themselves to move my mother. And they said they would send me the bills. They actually said that, we would assume that if you don't sign our forms, that you're, reneging on your responsibility for your mother, and we will move her without your consent into a home that we think is appropriate, without further consultation. And of course, I wrote back to them and said, well, that would be tantamount to kidnap and assault, and I would lay criminal charges at a police station if that happens. Of course, it didn't.
So now your mother is in a nursing home that you are content with?
Yes, I mean, the nursing home was one that was recommended to me, and I did say to the NHS, well, if you do want to move, my mother, this is a home that I'd be, happy that she would get good care, and she moved into a home, Willow Lodge, and the care there is absolutely excellent.
Are you paying the bills?
No. And after my mother had been in there a short time, this was a discussion I had with the home, because I said to the home, I'm not paying the bill. Quite happy to pay the bill if I'm ordered to do so by a court, but I believe that the NHS is acting illegally in this matter. It's a commercial dispute, if you like. I don't think they're right in their interpretation of the law. And I think this is a matter that should go to court. And I would have thought the NHS and social services departments would be anxious to take these sorts of cases to court, because of course it would determine where the line is between social care, which is what people do have to pay for, and health care, where there's a responsibility on the Secretary of State for Health to provide that care free of charge.
But no one seems very anxious to take you to court.
Well, of course not, because they've already been to court in the Coughlan case and lost, where what the High Court said there at the Court of Appeal was that if the primary reason you need to be cared for in a private home is because of your healthcare reason, and you need nursing care as a result, then that's a responsibility for the NHS, and they have to pay the bill. So they've already lost that case. What one would have hoped is that the NHS would have brought many more cases to court, but of course they haven't, because I think they're frightened of the consequences if they lose, because of the cost that they would have to incur from all the elderly people who would qualify for free care.
In your case, you haven't paid the bills, you invited them to take you to court, they haven't taken up the invitation, but have they ever written to you and said to you, the NHS or social services, you're right, you don't have to pay the bills, or does the threat still hang over you?
No, the threat still hangs over us, but they are paying the bills at the home. The home have confirmed to me that they're getting their bills paid, because what happened was, after my mother had been in there a short period, because I said to the home, well, we're not paying the bills, this is a contractual dispute, and the home, of course, spoke to the NHS and the Social Services Department and said they would return my mother to NHS care, and at which point the NHS started to pay jointly the NHS and Social Services Department started to pay the bills, because, of course, the NHS can never charge you. What happens is they transfer responsibility to social services departments, and they then are the people who means test you and start charging.
Is there a possibility, Mr. Perkin, that you're someone who knows how to play the system, and that you're pushing your entitlement as far as you possibly can, that you're playing the system pretty hard?
Well, I certainly am playing the system hard, because I've been a player within the system, and I think it would be a dereliction of duty to my mother, and the fact that I have power of attorney, if I didn't do the best I possibly could for her, knowing how the system works. And at the end of the day, I'm also interested in making sure that other elderly people get a square deal as well, and I've always made it clear that people can get in touch with me if they've got these sorts of problems, and I'll try and advise them impartially and fairly.
But are you playing fair?
Oh, I'm playing fair. Crikey, I'm just one man on his own at the end of the day. I mean, the NHS and social services have got huge resources at their disposal. They've got all the resources that the government have got at their disposal. Government can put as much input into this as it wants in terms of legal resources if these cases went to court. And that's what it would do. Of course, the reason they don't is the real fear that at the end of the day, if they went to court and lost, the financial ramifications for the NHS and the government would be huge. But is it fair that the government actually subsidises an NHS service by unfairly penalising the most vulnerable people who use it, and that's the elderly? But it's a penal tax on the elderly sick. I think that's the point to make. You know, probably the most vulnerable group of people in our society. Because if you had a massive stroke today and were taken into hospital, there'd probably be no question about inquiring into your bank account. But if you were over 75, one of the first things that happens, of course, is that once you're recovered from the immediate sort of 2 or 3 days of treatment, you're going to have a visit from someone, or your relatives are, saying, please fill in this form because we're going to assess charges for the health care that this person is going to need long term. And you will sign a form that says you agree to pay from that person's assets any charges that are assessed. It only comes about for really ill people. Why should that be? You know, the hypocrisy of it is mind-boggling in my view, because we often hear this, you know, the NHS provides healthcare services from cradle to grave. This is clearly not the case when elderly people are visited in hospital and forms are produced which say, please sign here so that we can find out what your assets are, what your income is, so that we can start applying charges to you for health care that you need simply because you have the misfortune to acquire an age-related illness.